All right, everyone, welcome to day 6. We are 27 hours from the pitch event. It's all getting extremely real. I'm sure you're feeling it, getting prepared. Today we have pitch practice and feedback from a group of VCs and founders with experience fundraising. So I think that'll be helpful to your process, help you tune that pitch up. But before that, we have our final speaker of the series, an absolute legend in gaming, Ed Fries. Ed is an OG game developer, creating his first game for the Atari 800 in the early 80s. He went on to join Microsoft and ultimately created Microsoft Game Studios. And over an 8-year period, he grew Game Studios from 50 to 1,200, published over 100 games, and co-founded the Xbox project, making Microsoft a major player in the game industry. Since then, Ed has been a founder, advisor, and board member to publishers, indie game developers, and media companies. In 2007, he created Fingerprints, a 3D printing tech company that brings video game characters to life. So he's been in your shoes as a founder, as a builder, as well as an investor. In 2013, he created Halo 2600, which was one of the first video games added to the permanent collection of the Smithsonian Art Museum. And most recently, Ed co-founded One Up Ventures, a venture fund to support independent developers around the world. So he's had an epic career and journey, and really thrilled to have him join us at Launchable Web3 Startup. So welcome, Ed, and thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Happy to chat. We've got a bunch of questions we can't wait to dig in with you. But first, really want to focus on what inspired you early on to build that game for the Atari 800? Like, where did this passion come from?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I grew up kind of before there were video games, you know, and I thought, you know, it was kind of boring. You know, we had like books and TV. There had to be more fun out there somewhere, you know. My parents were both very technical. They both moved out here to work for Boeing. So my dad is an electrical engineer, and we grew up like soldering stuff together, making simple things. And then my mom was a chemical engineer, worked actually at Boeing on the tiles for the precursor to the space shuttle. And then she went to University of Washington when we were a little bit older and got a master's in computer science and went to work for DEC. So they would be bringing stuff home for me to play with all the time. Dad would bring home these programmable calculators, and that was some of the first programming I did was actually on calculators. You know, Mom would bring home these printing terminals that were connected to a mainframe, and I could play like text adventures on, you know, over the telephone, you know. And so yeah, and you know, just playing those early games really made me wanna make some myself, you know. So once I got my hands on my own personal computer, you know, right around 1979 or so, yeah, I just fell in love with programming, and you know, games were the thing I wanted to make. So that's the start.
Well, it looks like that passion continues. I'm just looking behind you. I see an arcade back there.
Yeah, actually, I've really gotten into kind of getting into the roots of the game business, and this is actually the very first arcade video game that was ever made. It's one of them, you know. There's maybe 150 of these in the world, but it's a game called Computer Space. It was made in 1971 by a guy named Ted Dabney, which most people don't know, and a guy named Nolan Bushnell, who most people do know. They went off the next year after they made that game to start Atari, and the next game they built was Pong. So yeah, it's fun to go back and learn about the roots of the game business, but also to work on these machines and find out how they work on the inside.
I played Pong back in the day on a black and white TV, so I remember those days. That's really cool. As you look back at 25 years in game development, you know, what are you most proud of? You've done a lot of things and operated at a lot of different levels, from, you know, a builder to investor to, you know, Microsoft leading large organizations. Like, what are you most proud of through that journey?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm probably most known for, you know, acquiring the Bungie team and moving them out here and having them, you know, build Halo, but it's so indirect, you know, I can't take credit for that stuff. You know, I was a very early programmer on the first version of Excel for Windows. I became the lead programmer a few years later. And so I really got to working on both Excel and Word, working on things that people still use every day. So that was fun. Yeah, I think the thing that I'm proud of is less about me being proud of my own accomplishments, but proud of the industry. I felt like the games were the future of entertainment, and I would give talks about that back in the 90s about that, hey, this is going to be bigger than movies and TV and music, and now it's really finally true. I mean, this game business is a $200 billion annual business and growing 10% year over year. It's by far the fastest growing media business in the world and arguably the largest. And I just think that's because games are the future of entertainment. I mean, it's one thing to sit back and watch a movie or read a book, but with a game, you're active, you're involved, you're the main character, and you make the decisions. There's a really big game right now called Elden Ring, which my 17-year-old has been getting me to play this week, and it just reminds me of how great it is to be able to just dive into a fantasy world and live that experience. It's there's nothing like games. So
Absolutely.
that's the thing I'm proud of. I'm proud that we as an industry, made games the biggest media business in the world.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, you must just kind of continue to being amazed at how it's continuing to evolve too. I mean, the technology and the capabilities and the creativity around some of the formats. What, for you as a builder, as a developer going to Microsoft, I'm curious on that transition, because that's, because you had a nice run at Microsoft, but you kind of started as a creative builder type. How is that evolution for you personally?
Yeah, it's interesting. I made my first games as a high school kid, growing up here in Bellevue, local area, and somebody saw a Frogger clone I made called Froggy and tracked me down. I don't know how they found me. I was just a high school kid working at Shakey's Pizza and making games, and they wanted to hire me, which was kind of like a dream come true. I made games for them for several years. As I went off to college, I went to a little school in New Mexico, got my computer science degree. But halfway through, when I was doing that, 1984, the entire video game industry melted down. It's kind of this famous thing in the game business where the game industry then was about a $2 billion industry, and it went to about a $0 billion industry in a very short amount of time. And that would be a long topic to talk about why that happened. But most of the game companies went out of business, and it was kind of like, oh, games are just a fad, and we're going to move on to something else. And so actually, at that point, I needed a job. I started to work running one of the computers at the university, and as a C programmer, I could program anything. Got a summer job, summer '85, working at Microsoft, and they liked the job I did, so they hired me full time in '86, and I came on the Excel project, which was great. I mean, programming is programming. It's super fun and challenging, and we had this big task. There were just 7 of us trying to take on the biggest personal software company in the world at that time. Was a company called Lotus. It wasn't Microsoft. And our little team was trying to beat their flagship product, Lotus 1-2-3. And so it was great fun. It wasn't games, but I was still a gamer. I was playing games on the side and kind of working my way up through the company and doing stuff that I loved. I loved games and I loved programming. So.
And then you made that transition to create Microsoft Game Studios, and then that new path. So was that, once you spent enough time, you just said, I have to get back to my passion, kind of where I'm really drawn to. How did that move happen?
Yeah, it was tricky, actually. It's easy to be nostalgic about it and say, oh yeah, I just went and did this thing. But basically I had spent 10 years in Office, and I'd worked my way up. The last 5 years of that, I had been managing a 60-person team running Word. And the next step for me in my career was to run a business. And my bosses were saying, hey, you should go off and do another business that's inside Microsoft. Maybe you should go be the manager of PowerPoint, move down to California. You could do that. Or I looked at a thing with a guy named Hank Vigil, who you may know, and we were going to be 2 in a box doing this TV thing, So I was looking at all these different things where I could run a business, but I was kind of, there were 2, when I was running Word, I was still programming half time. I was working on Word, and I loved that part of my job. I love to be able to still program. And I knew that when I became a business manager, I'd have to give that up. And so I'm thinking, well, there's really only two things that I love. I love the games, which at that point was just a hobby, and I love programming. So if I have to give up programming, what if I could do it with games? And so I found out that there was the games group at the company, which was quite small at that time, had an opening at the top. And I said to my bosses, I said, hey, I want to go do this. I want to go run that business. And they were not happy. Multiple vice presidents called me into their office. One told me I was committing career suicide. Another said, why would you leave office, one of the most important parts of this company, to go work on something no one cares about? That's what they told me. Fortunately, I didn't listen to them. And, I put my foot down and said, no, this is really the job that I'm passionate about. This is what I want to do. And they kind of rolled their eyes and said, fine, go do that thing, and so thanks for them for letting me do that. And yeah, and then it was just, 2 weeks later, I showed up in the group and they're like, hey, we have a trip planned to Japan next week. Do you want to come along? I'm like, I love Japan. I'd love to go, and week later, I'm walking down the street at night in Japan. We had just spent the day visiting all these great Japanese game developers. And I was like, it was stressful to make this decision when so many people were telling me I was making a mistake. But that night when I was walking down the street in Japan, I was like, oh, I made the right decision. This is great. I have the best job. This is going to be so much fun. And it really was.
That is such a cool story. I mean, just following your passion, even when it maybe on paper at the time didn't seem so obvious.
Yeah.
And then that validation where you're, in a space with the kind of people and kind of projects you want to be around. That's really cool.
Exactly.
So you mentioned kind of part of what you're most proud about is how this industry's evolved and the impact it has now, the size and scale. What trends, themes in gaming have you most excited right now as you kind of think about where we stand today? And I'm kind of interested now in kind of how you see it unfolding. What has your attention and interest?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting last 20 years in the game business. When I left Microsoft in 2004, the projects were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there was a lot of pressure to do less and less projects because they were getting so expensive that it was really risky. And when the budgets go up, the risk goes up. And so unfortunately, sometimes the innovation goes down because you just can't, you end up with these projects that are so expensive, they kind of can't afford to fail. And through a good part of the 2000s, it just seemed like that was where the game industry was headed. Smaller and, less and less, bigger and bigger projects, more sequels, less original content, which was really kind of concerning. Kind of in the late 2000s, things started to really change. And there were a couple factors. One, Apple came out with the iPhone. And when they first came out with that, everybody was like, oh, you can't make a game on that thing. It doesn't have any buttons. It doesn't have any controllers, But of course, people were wrong, like they usually are. Games go everywhere. Games love to go into whatever new technology there is. Valve had been experimenting for several years with this digital distribution mechanism called Steam as a way to kind of free themselves from publishers. And at that time, there was just a small set of publishers that really controlled the game business, and really they had that control because there was this sort of pinch point, which was distribution. If you wanted to make a game, you had to have a way to make a lot of boxes and put those boxes in stores all over the world. And Walmart didn't want to talk to 1 million people about putting their box on the shelf. So there was just these inbuilt parts of the system that made it optimized for a small number of companies. And that meant if you're a game developer, you had to talk to one of these big companies, and if they didn't believe your vision, you were kind of screwed. With digital distribution, with the iPhone, people all of a sudden could take their make a product and bring it to market themselves. That's the great thing about the software business. We can make infinite copies of what we build for free. It's every once in a while I get steered a little bit over into the hardware side of things, and then I remember how good we have it in the software side. once we make it, we can just make infinite copies for free. So anyway, so actually kind of the time between sort of 2008, 2010, and now has just been a renaissance in the game business. Now there's, the game business has grown globally in a huge way. We have many more platforms, multiple ways of distribution. And the biggest thing I think is really freeing ourselves up from this physical product that was in stores. And so that makes it possible for you to have small game developers again, who can make products and bring them directly to market at a price point they choose. When you put something in a box, you kind of had to sell it for $60 because you kind of work backwards from that. And it's the only way that everybody in the chain could be paid and they could still make money. But when it's software's, free to copy, and then you can do free distribution effectively, you can set the price point wherever you want. And so that's been the revolution that we've gone through over the last 10 years. And now, the game business has products at all prices, and, mobile is now the biggest single part of the game business, where it didn't exist, 12 years ago or 14 years ago. So yeah, it's just been an incredible time in games. Sorry, I kind of went on there, but there's a lot to talk about to answer your question.
It's fantastic. I mean, it just led right to my next question, which was around kind of what motivated you to found OneUp Ventures. And it sounds like it ties in with that. I mean, because I know you're supporting indie game developers with this fund. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about OneUp Ventures and your thinking behind that.
Yeah, so like pretty much everything I've done in my life, I had no idea what I was doing getting into it. So it's like when I went to run the games business, I had never run a business before in Microsoft, and so I'm I'm going into a meeting and they're like asking me questions about my P&L, and I barely even know what a P&L is. I'm not an MBA, like, what is this thing? How does it work? As far as OneUp Ventures goes, yeah, I'd been doing a lot of board and advisor stuff, and I enjoyed that because it kept me connected to the game business and working with startups and creative people, which I love. And then out of the blue, about 3.5 years ago, I was approached by guys from who made the game PUBG, which has been a huge success, a battle royale genre, the creators of the battle royale genre in the game business out of Korea. And they had heard about me, and they were thinking about starting a venture fund as a way to reach out to developers in the West. And so they approached me and asked if I would be willing to start a venture fund, and that they would put some of the funding in for it. Yeah, at the same time, I had been part of kind of a secret group of independent developers for a decade before that. And that group was started by a friend of mine and always has 50 members in it. And the 50 members all get to know each other really well, and they all communicate a lot and help each other be successful. They share a lot of information. They talk about what they're going through as founders. It's kind of a support group. They have each other's back. And so I had really enjoyed being part of that. And at the same time, I had worked on a bunch of venture funded startups, and I'd kind of seen how traditional venture kind of sometimes works with the game business and sometimes isn't the perfect fit for it. And so I thought, well, what if I have a chance to start this venture fund? I love the way this other group works. What if I make a fund that works like this other group? When I ran Microsoft's game business, we would have a large portfolio of games going at any one time, and that's a way to deal with the risk in the business. Games are super hard. I think it's one of the hardest businesses in the sense that it has all the things that can go wrong with a piece of software, like any software project that we've all seen go sideways, combined with all the things that can go wrong with a piece of entertainment, right? So you're basically taking Hollywood risk and combining it with software technology risk. They're hard businesses. And so you don't want to just dabble in the business. You don't want to make like a couple investments, in my opinion, unless you're really confident. You want to have a broad portfolio. And so that idea combined with the idea of having this group of people who help each other, those two ideas come together to form OneUp. So the idea of OneUp is that we'll make 50 investments in 50 game companies relatively early. Because I'm the only full-time employee of the first fund, I want to make it as cookie cutter as possible. We only invest in game developers. We always invest the same amount, 500K. We always invest sub 20 million pre, and we're never lead. So we're always working with other venture funds in partnership with other venture funds. And the goal is to make 50 investments and to connect all those founders together in this supportive community where they can all help and support each other. Invest in a diversity of different kinds of games, for different platforms in different places, so all over the world, and make sure that our founders are really diverse as well. We're actually about 50% diverse founders, I would say. So of that, more than a third of our founders are female founder or co-founder led companies. And so all those things come together to form this really unique thing that has one up. And so we get included in a lot of deals because, and basically a lead investor will come in and they'll do the heavy lifting and do the paperwork and do the deep due diligence. But they need some people to help fill out the round. They'll bring us in because they know that we add value through this community network that we create. And it's worked really well. Over 3 years, we've done 42 investments now. None of the companies that we've invested in so far have gone out of business in 3 years, which is good in the game business. We have one company that's $1.6 billion valuation now, and 5 that are over 100 million valuation. And so the numbers look really good for the fund, and we're just gearing up to do fund 2. So as I was telling you before we started, so we'll get to 50 probably sometime this summer, and then we'll roll right in to a second fund and do it again and do another 50.
I can imagine that community is extremely valuable for founders as they're working through challenges. And as you said, there's so much risk. You've got the entertainment risk and the gaming risk, and you put it all in one. So having people who are working through similar challenges, there's just a lot of value in that. And then the fact that your career, I'm sure others that you've brought around your network, really add a lot of value to these teams. What are you most looking for in the projects and the people that you back?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned people, because that's really where we start. It really starts for us with the team. What's their experience, and do they have a complete team? Do they have, which in the game business normally means you've got some design talent, you've got some technical talent, you've got some artistic talent. Most of the teams that we invest in, I'd say a typical team has, the founders have 10 plus years of experience in the game business, working in bigger game companies or in bigger projects, and they're stepping out for the first time to do their own thing. And so there's usually a group of 3, 4, 5 founders. Often these companies aren't much more than a deck in the game business when we get involved. Sometimes they are, but it's not unusual to have just a team and a deck. And those companies right now can go out and they can raise at a 10 to 20 million valuation pretty commonly. There's actually more than when I started 3 years ago, game funds that invest specifically in the game business were actually relatively rare. I thought there might be 30 in the world. Now my list is more than 100, and it's growing all the time, especially with the Web3 stuff. That's bringing in a whole new class of investors. So,
and that was another point that I want to dig into a bit, is like, how are you seeing Web3 play into some of these projects, and what do you find compelling in terms of Web3 and the intersection of gaming?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. The one thing is, I'm pretty familiar with the technology. I mined Bitcoin back in the day when it was a new thing. I like to play around with new technologies. I've got 7 Bitcoins sitting in an account, which I thought was, I mined it until it burned out my $200 graphics card, and then I thought, well, that was dumb. It turns out it was actually a pretty good move. It was just held on to them for 20 years or whatever. But I was an advisor to a company called Pixel that did a game called The Sandbox. And for people involved with Web3 gaming, they'll probably know about them. They were a real innovator. They were the first people I heard the term NFT from 4 or 5 years ago when I was an advisor to them, before I started the fund. And through that, I became an advisor to Animoca, which has been another leader in this space. So I have connections to this space. What I would say though is like a lot of new technologies, some of the core ideas that are interesting have actually been around for a long time. I mean, people were gold farming on World of Warcraft back in 2004, and there were gold farmers making money. You could say that was play to earn, almost 20 years ago. People were trying to build in-game economies that were connected to real money. And certainly Roblox has done that, and with their conversion from Robux to actual dollars. Take a look at some of the stuff that Valve has done over the years, with building creator communities that could actually pay people to make things. They did this. There are people whose full-time job was just to make hats in some of their games, which was kind of cool. And then that really exploded with CS:GO, Counter-Strike Go, and what they call skins, these weapon skins. And that's actually a multi-billion-dollar business today, where people buy and sell and trade these skins, which are effectively NFTs, I guess you could say, before there were NFTs. Even something like Pokemon and finding a rare shiny Pokemon, if that was built on the blockchain, people wouldn't be able to duplicate them like they can, So I think we have this core technology, this, public key, private key encryption technology that can make it possible to do these ideas that people were already playing with in the game business, but do it in a way that's secure and unhackable, if there is such a thing. And so I think that's exciting. But like a lot of things, people sometimes get too excited about a technology. And, we saw that maybe 5 years ago with virtual reality, and there was like a lot of people rushing in to fund VR stuff. And sometimes people get a little too excited, and making games themselves are really hard, as I talked about. And so add another layer of technology risk onto the other risks that are already built into what you're doing. And, every game should be taking some risk for sure. It should be doing some new things, but you have to be careful about how far you go. Companies who bet 100% on VR, most of them ended up regretting it, right? And so I think, we're going to see successes and failures like we always do in the game business, and we'll see, a small number will be wildly successful, and that's the way the game business gets built, one brick at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really resonates, the idea of just purposeful implementation of Web3 concepts into the game. Any red flags when you see a pitch come your way around Web3 being integrated, whether it's NFTs or other metaverse concepts? Any red flags that give you pause when you see those pitch come your way?
Yeah, I mean, we invest in game companies, so we like to see people with a game experience building a game. And if they, those games, we invest in companies that adopt all kinds of interesting new technologies, whether it's web-based, cloud streaming, VR, AR, all kinds of things. But the core is that they're game makers who are making an entertainment experience. That's what we want to see. And I have literally received whole pitches that say they're for games that do not describe a game anywhere in the pitch. None of the people on them have any experience making games, and there's no game described. It's like, here's our token strategy, here's our NFT strategy, and then end of slide, we're raising this much money at this end of deck, raising this much money at this valuation. It's like, okay, I didn't see the game in there. So I like a pitch deck, I like to see a pitch deck start with the team. I really want to know the experience of the team up front. I'm always trying to get people to move their team slide up front. Some people are shy to do that, or people told them not to do that. Put your team up front, because I want to hear, if you've been working on games for 20 years, then when you talk about game stuff, I'm going to believe you. If I just hear you talking about game stuff, but I don't know your background, I don't know whether to believe you or not. So first tell me what your experience is, then I'll know when you're talking about this, I can believe you. When you're talking about something else that's not your experience, like, okay, maybe they know what they're talking about there, maybe they don't, you know. So I want to hear from the team part first. Then I want some game, but then I also want to know, and this is a lot of people who are from the game business are used to pitching publishers, and when you're pitching a publisher, it's all about the game. But when you're pitching a VC, we're going to be investors in your company, so we want to know about the company. You know, what's your ambition for this company? You know, how quickly do you want to grow? What's your plans for doing multiple products beyond just this one game? You know, where are you headed? Because we're going to be on that journey with you. So don't just focus on the game. Be sure that you talk some about where, you know, your vision for where you want this company to be in the future. That's important.
That's a great place to end this portion. We're going to go to the chat and some questions, but you know, for this group of founders, they're working on their pitches. They're getting ready for the event tomorrow, and I think this emphasis on team is such an important theme to remember for those pitches, because you know, that's really, you know, a lot of these are early stage, and that's the bet. So I appreciate you emphasizing that. I think that's great advice. Just looking over here in the chat, a bunch of great questions. I thought this one would be kind of a fun one to start with. What are you doing to scratch your programming itch these days? From Jeremy.
You know, this is kind of wacky. I'm working on an art project, working with a local Seattle artist, Ginny Ruffner. And for people from Seattle, they made she does these kind of big installation projects. Like if you get off the I-5 in Seattle at Union, across the street, there's a giant flower pot that does this kind of mechanical stuff. That's a Ginny Ruffner piece, for example. And a friend of mine was working with her and had the idea that they should do something around the Aurora Borealis. And her and Ginny were brainstorming, and then they, well, maybe we could do something with LEDs. And I do some LED programming stuff. I actually have a light over there that's that I made that's doing all this LED stuff. And so anyway, so they're like, oh, I know someone who does LED stuff. And then they reach out to me. But it turns out I've known Ginny for years, and I know her through the Smithsonian, that work that I do at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So it was kind of this weird circle that came together. Anyway, so we're building this giant LED. It's kind of like a screen, but it's made of these vertical strips that shows, it's 20 feet tall by 10 feet wide. And it basically, what I do is I feed little sections of video from actual auroras into a generative adversarial neural network. Okay, and I train these neural networks, and then I can have the neural network spit out more of what it was trained with. That's what a GAN can do, a generative adversarial network. And so basically, I create these little infinite aurora generators. Okay, and then so this giant thing does all sorts of crazy color stuff that's all trained from actual video, but then interpreted by an AI, interpreted by this neural network. And it's actually super cool. I've been working on it for a couple of years now. We're getting ready to, it'll open at Bainbridge Island Museum of Art in the fall, and then it's actually going to go to Nordic Museum in Seattle and Tacoma Art Museum and a bunch of other places. So, because Ginny's an awesome salesperson. So
that's fascinating, and that's cool to be able to see that here in the local area, in Seattle area. And for those that are the global, you have to come visit, or maybe it'll come to your city. That's really interesting. Another question that I thought was a good one from Laura. In your opinion, what are the reasons that VR didn't take off during the first boom 5 years ago? And what has changed since then?
I love that. I love that first boom, because it was actually the fourth or fifth VR boom. VR had come out, it was coming out every 5 years and failing for 20 or 25 years. And it's fun to go back and see the really big old VR headsets that were out there. And every time it was going to be revolutionary. I think there's a couple lessons to take away from it. You know, one early concern I had when that thing was booming was just people don't like to put stuff on their face. You know, I mean, it sounds like a simple thing, but you know, you think about, remember when all the TVs were going to become 3D TVs? You remember that? It was this huge thing, and all the TV industry rushed all these, 3D TVs out there, and it's completely veiled. Nobody wanted them. Nobody wanted to wear the little shutter glasses on their face, even though they were kind of lightweight, to have that 3D experience. So it has to be super compelling to get somebody to block their vision and put something on their head. And VR is pretty compelling, but it also has some setbacks too. I mean, VR is still out there, it's still growing. But what happens is, like, a technology like that can be on a curve like this, but then the hype goes like this, and so it makes it seem like, oh, it's going to be amazing, and then it seems like, oh, it was bust, but really it's still quietly growing on a pace of people that just kind of match their expectations to the pace. It would have been okay. So I'm not anti VR, but they're still solving important technical problems there. I know for me, when I play, I can do about half an hour, and then it messes with my head. I gotta get out of there. And I think it's just not completely in sync with what our brains are looking for yet.
Yeah. Another question here from Elizabeth. What are the biggest obstacles for Web3 startups right now in the market? Any tips to overcome them?
I guess it's kind of like what I was just saying about VR. I mean, I think there is a ton of hype right now, and that can be good, and it can also be bad. We have a little company that we invested in Wales, a two-person company when we invested in them, called Tiny Rebel. But I've known the founders for 20 plus years. Great game people, and they've been doing some small things. They did a Wallace and Gromit game for Apple that was really cool, augmented reality. And now they just started something called the Petaverse, where you can make these virtual pets, and it's all Web3. And they went out to raise, they thought, okay, we're going to go raise $1 million. And then all these crypto guys got excited, and then we were like, okay, we're going to raise 3 million. Okay, we're going to raise 5 million. Then they had more than 7 million that people wanted to put into this tiny company. I mean, they're literally, it's Tiny Rebel Games is part of a bigger thing, which is a Tiny Rebel brewery in Wales. It's like they make beer. And these people are lining up to give these guys $7 million, which great. They're awesome. They're awesome founders. And so we ended up selling part of our ownership, at that price, so that they could get more of the investors in. Anyway, it's crazy out there right now, I guess is what I'm saying. And when the money's going to people like them that I know what they're doing, and they're gonna make something great, it's okay. But I think I don't know. I don't know about you, but I get a lot of LinkedIn requests right now that have all this just Web3 jargon on their description of what they do, and it reminds me of I'm being old enough to having lived through the original .com boom, 1999, or it feels a lot like that sometimes, and that's what worries me. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I think it does, and I think, again, back to these pitches, I think being really clear about how the Web3 concepts create unique value for users and why it's better than existing solutions. I think it's just an important theme to get grounded on those things. And yeah, so I think that's helpful. I'm looking at time. I think we've got one more question, and it's a good one. It's from Emmanuel, okay, who's leading a new game startup. Any tips for how to balance taking the time of finding the fun in game concepts with the need to show traction and with limited runway that a startup has?
Yeah. I mean, I think among game investors, the shortcut there is experience, So usually in that first round, so when I say first round, typically the companies we see have raised maybe a few $100,000, friends and family, enough to quit their jobs and be focused fully on this product. And then they're getting ready to go out and do their first real raise, their first priced round. That's usually when we get involved. So we want to see that everybody is full-time on the project, of the core founders. Usually they'll have a list of people once they get their big funding that they're going to go out and recruit, but they'll have that core team at least is on it. And usually they more or less, if they have background, they more or less get credit for that. You know, that in that first round, people aren't expecting to see huge fancy demos. They're not investing because of something that you're going to show there. And you know, those first rounds that we participate in are usually in the 3 to 7 million range, you know, falling sub 20 million pre. If you have like a couple superstars really well known in the game industry that come out, sometimes they can raise higher, but more typically it's in the range I just mentioned. And that money really needs to take you, the money you raise in that first round really needs to take you to a point that's where you really have something to show. So that's the planning that you want to do, is like you want to raise enough money to get, because when you go out to raise that second round, it's a really different experience. Then you're talking to a kind of a different class of investors, and they, you know, like if you, let's say you're doing a mobile game, which is the most concrete, they really want to see a product in test market, and they want to have metrics. They want to look at what's the retention on this over time, you know, what's the, you know, what's, there's, I don't know, there's a whole jargon for talking about web games, or sorry, mobile games. But anyway, they want very concrete metrics that they can use to compare against other games. You know, if you're doing something much bigger, like a AAA game that might have a budget that's 50 million and up, you're obviously not going to be there, but you could at least get to, you know, a first playable, some kind of at least demo that shows the core technologies, that kind of thing. So it really varies by kind of what category of game you're trying to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. Well, we'll just kind of open this one last piece of advice for these founders, operators in Web3. Any kind of last piece of advice?
Yeah, my advice is to find advisors. You know, going through a program like this is great, where you can learn from people and, you know, get experience. Reaching out to people in the game industry who, you know, can make connections for you and support you along the way. It's tough to, there's just a lot to learn at the beginning, and it can be intimidating. And you know, the more you can have a group of people around you who are on your side and help you, I think that can really jumpstart your chances for being successful.
Awesome. Well, this has been awesome. We've really enjoyed it. Appreciate you taking the time with us on a Saturday afternoon, and appreciate all the wisdom and advice for founders. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for including me. I wish I could be there for the pitches tomorrow. I will be on a flight down to Game Developers Conference tomorrow, but good luck to everybody on their pitches. Don't stress, have fun, show your stuff, be confident in what you're doing. I'm sure it's really cool.
Thank you so much.